right way to go forward. So that's one. Any questions? Anything like, does it resonate with you guys? It's going.
Just real quick, whenever you say Spark, you're talking about Spark Scala?
That's correct. So okay. Apache Spark, the distributed first sort of a platform, on Hadoop. Also works on Hadoop, I guess. Cool. So the second story that I have is that hey, I cannot manage the code that you write or maintain the code in Python because I hire Java engineers, which I think is also a ridiculous argument because hey, like you should be hiring engineers and they will be able to learn whatever they have to learn. They'll pick up Java, they'll pick up C, they'll probably learn Haskell if you like put a gun on your head, stuff. Right? So, like but it is something that a lot of executives take a lot of pride in. That hey, I am hiring 2,000 Java developers, and I'm the man, and I cannot do anything else because of that. So that's another thing that I've seen, which is like an amazingly tough thing to overcome because it is just perception. The reality is that we actually ran it at one of these like organizations. We basically took the GitHub, the enterprise GitHub install, and just did a code, percentage of code by languages that they have had. And what we learned is that even though they have all this Java experts, in this particular instance, it turned out that about 40% of their whole code base was already in Python, and these people just did not realize it, and they just keep on hiring, whatever the engineers would keep on doing the right things, but that message may not get communicated all the way up to the executive chain. So that's an organizational thing that you can only sort of reject that sort of a thought by giving them real concrete data, and because of sort of the GitHub being in a lot of these types of organizations, I will encourage everybody to look at your organization's GitHub and basically see, hey, who's doing what, and you might actually find that one dude who's doing a lot of Haskell stuff, right? So that's another thing. Any questions, thought? Hey, I really want this to be interactive. I don't have anything prepared. So
can you get into the breakdown of what had caused that transition from Java to Python, where it ended up being 40% Python, and how were they working together? Were there completely isolated sectors of the company, or were they tied up together?
Yeah, so it is so in the ops world, Python is like #1 choice, at least from what I've seen in a lot of enterprises. So that adds up, and people don't realize that hey, it is being used, but it is being used under the hood. In the data science world, most things are either R or Python. There's some Scala, but that's like basically your $20 million investment talking, right? It's not like people are not self-selecting to write that Scala code unless they have that kind of need, and that's like mostly in advertising and all those industries. Cool.
Can you speak to the interop question? I think you also asked about how do they play together, right?
Oh, absolutely. So they don't.
Yeah, the DevOps is ending.
Right. So it is like they have this like sort of interesting mix where people do make things to work together, but they're basically through like API abstractions and like things like that. And that's something that is like very natural, but it may not be the investment that your executives are thinking about that is on their top of their mind. Because a lot of these people have like not coded in a long time, so you gotta give them some benefit of doubt.
I have a question about you said you dual implemented something in numeric Python and Spark or Hadoop or MapReduce or whatever is because the problems are too big for one little CPU. I mean, was that an issue with you guys? Were people using Spark for things that would run on my laptop?
Yep. Yeah. So no, they are, and that's the beautiful marketing machine that is like already out there, right? Because people want to be cool, and they think the only way to attract talent is to have this sophisticated, distributed stuff that they may not even need, and they may not even have that kind of problems. So like in my life, I have seen like maybe 3 instances where you actually have a truly big data problem, and that does not come by that often. You can do most of the things in single machines in a load balanced way, whatever that may be, and that's something that I think a lot of people don't really realize. Cool. So my last story, which I think is is also very very related here, is so like the story goes like this. I joined this company. I built a internal web app. I had a team that really loved Python, and we basically used Flask to do the middleware for the web server. Whatever. I mean, it could be whatever, right? Like I don't have any like big things around like, hey, this thing has to be in Python, because it's not about scale. It was just like ease of use anyway. And my project actually got shut down because the argument that we cannot support multiple types of middlewares when we already have invested in this Java ecosystem. The reality there is that it doesn't matter, right? The reality is that most of your build system or your build tool chains can now, like actually work with Python as well. Like you don't have to invent anything new. You just have to maybe fine tune it or in a organizational setting to create that type of understanding. And that's all it really takes. It's a learning agenda. It's not that, hey, you cannot build this because you used a middleware that we don't like or we may not have seen before. So that's a common problem, especially in terms of like outside of data science, when you're trying to build web apps and these services. You will basically run into that at some point where people are like, hey, you have to do it in this sort of, my Tomcat stack, whatever I have, which I like adore, and you need to do it this one way. And the common thing is about like it is operationally viable to actually make that happen. It's really, it doesn't matter in the modern sort of CI/CD world. You can build almost anything you want. You can deploy almost anything you want. It's like we live in this world of containers, and no one really like sort of has that type of understanding that, hey, we don't really need to be tied to this one stack, and that's something that we see a lot. A similar example in terms of like data science is like really comes from this like marketing machine is like basically saying that, hey, Spark MLlib or H2O is the way to go because it will give you a POJO, you can deploy it, tell all your data scientists to basically use these 2 tools. Now that is super maddening because you're like, hey, like you only have basically a couple of tool choices, and you may not be able to customize it the way you want. You may not have access to the algorithms that you're looking for. There could be like multiple reasons around that, but no, like a lot of people don't think about it from that perspective, and there is like this thing is like, if I have a problem, let's try to fit it in H2O, and in one instance or MLlib, and in one instance, especially in financial services where it's like highly regulated, what we learned is that the model that MLlib was fitting was actually wrong. So we actually couldn't use it, and we had to kind of revert back to our like tried and tested scikit-learn type of things. And that was another example of the about the similar thing that, hey, you gotta be able to use it in this way, because I know how to deploy this model, because it's a POJO. And the answer, like around how do you sort of circumvent it is, in our case, we invested like numerous man hours serializing a scikit-learn model into a Java object. It worked, but it is probably not necessary. We did not have to invest in that. We could have just deployed a scikit-learn model. We could have like basically deployed it in like many different types of ways. But people are like risk averse in these type of situations.
So you're giving the arguments that other people are giving against you, and I mean, I'm sure some of them have merit, but
Yeah.
what kind of arguments do you make back? I mean, there's the data argument or the numbers argument of lines of code or man hours, but is it really just this is the best tool for the job? I mean, how do you strategize against that?
Yeah, so it is very situation dependent, because at like you have to understand that there are like in some instances there are like executives' decisions are very tied to the exact technology that they had, and their success metric in their brain is making sure that is actually successful. And one of the reasons I'm a consultant today is that I make their their bad decisions okay, because I know like, hey, we can make Python work with Java stack. It's gonna be hard, but it can be done. But to answer your question directly, like it is really like you have to have a community in your organization. Like it cannot be just one person's voice, and you to cultivate that type of a thing, because I think being able to rely on open source world and sort of the momentum behind that, that would dictate a lot of this type of change. The other part of it is that you have to sort of show in some instances the long way that like here's why I chose Python or I chose R, and generally speaking, like for scientific Python, like that argument is fairly simple because the stack is so more like mature that you can basically say that look that like I can do this array manipulation quickly, while in Java it will basically take me, I don't know, whatever that may be. So like over time though, like I think that argument may not fly because the Java community is actually getting pretty serious about scientific sort of computing world, but like at this point I think it's fairly true.
I seem to hear you hint that you had made something that could reasonably be called scikit-learn for J. You didn't. I don't recall seeing such a thing in your GitHub, nor do I recall reading about you raising money, venture capital money to go.
It's lost in the enterprise GitHub, man. Yeah, so it was like it's not as generic as it could have been. So it's not it's like that's why I don't have venture money behind me. But it was like a very ad hoc sort of serialization mechanism for that. But it is an important piece because look, you as numerical computing sort of practitioners, you are gonna have to learn how to work well with Java and other languages. And Java is the most ubiquitous sort of stack, and to be able to and there's a ton of momentum behind that in the big data space. So we have to find creative ways where these types of arguments do not have like any kind of validity anymore.
There are two problems I ran into when living in the Java/Python world where those things live together is and to get the Java people to accept to do Python. One is the tooling, because Java shops who have run for a long time, usually they have Eclipse really well tuned and it works really well for them, and people who have worked with it for 5 or 10 years, or C++ people with Visual Studio, do you have something to tell them, well, do Python, I have the same kind of tool. So that's my first question, and my second is how do you deal with the fact that in Python it's not clear how you should do async programming with all the thing where should you use Python 2 and twisted, or Python 3 or 3.5, or
Second question first. So I think we should all be using Python 3 at this point. Like no one should be writing new code in like Python 2 ever again. That's one. But like I think so as long as you are sort of convinced that Python is the right tool for the job, and it is super fast from speed to market perspective, like the Quora runs on Python. And one of the main reasons that they cite is that, hey, it is super fast for us to change and be agile. So that's one, right? Like within Python, like you should go with the choice which has the most community backing or has the most sort of proven use cases. So Twisted versus Tornado, I'm kind of partial to that. Like Tornado is probably going to be my choice because I'm familiar with it, but there are whatever you like is probably okay from that perspective. The first question is a lot harder. So it's very hard to change habits. So if there is a tool that someone likes and they're gonna not use anything else. So an example that comes to my mind is not exactly Java, but I think it applies, was a transformation effort that we had from transitioning people from SAS, which is a closed source proprietary to the computing package or software, and then to sort of transition them to open source Python. And people were very comfortable with SAS. They were not familiar with the challenges of the open source around like how to deploy code, maintain it, and so on. And it was like at that level of change, you need to have executive buy-in, and it needs to be like top-down approach, which I've seen working. And the way it actually kind of like at the end of the day works out is it will take some years, and in some cases many years. But it will happen as you hire more people, as you convince current people to be more open to these types of things, and you'll see that people will get attracted to a new tool if it saves them, a few hours of work, and that's all it really is at the end of the day. And I think there's a transformational effort that has to happen, and that's more grassroots. So I'm afraid there's no easy answer. So if somebody loves Java, you're probably not gonna be able to convert them easily. It also depends on exact problem at hand and if there's meaningful benefit that you could have from an other tool. Does that help?
Yeah.
So I know you work in a specific market, but I'm curious, is it harder to hire Java people or Python people? Do you have to pay more for one or the other? And
Yeah.
do you get people in one who want to learn the other? And is that part of how you get people to transition? It's like, hey, learn Python and you can make more
Yeah.
money.
So I'm gonna actually give out my trade secret here. In terms of talent and like its sort of saturation, it's very hard to find top talent in Java today, unless you are one of those like super hip Silicon Valley startups or Facebook or like Amazon, whatever. It's very tough to do that because like there's a this point where you don't have enough top level Java people. But in Python, it's like kind of like a wide open space that you can hire a lot of people in Python who are super good, probably are not gonna cost you as much as a Java engineer is, but they are gonna be or at the same level of Java engineer. But on average, it'll be a little bit more expensive. But you have a talent pool that you can tap into that has not been sort of tapped in the same way Java is. So it is actually kind of a blue ocean from that perspective. Like there's a ton of very smart people, and they are probably at the top of their you know, sort of professional work, who can be hired, who can be, like, you know, acquired or hired in some way or form.
So the trade secret is that if you want a great job, become a top-level Java programmer?
Sorry, the trade secret is that I could hire really good Python people because there are enough of us, and the people have not really tapped into this space that well. That's also one of the reasons why the Continuum is super cool, right? Because they have one of the best Python people ever.
So going back to what you said a moment ago, top Python people know Python 3 and not Python 2.
That's not true. I mean, most people do like know Python 2. It's not as big of a debate point anymore. I mean, so it used to be when G-Event was like only Python 2. Like I could see a point where you say, hey, I want to use G-Event, so I'm gonna write this code in like Python 2. But now it's like almost everything is like compatible with Python 3.
You need another beer?
Depends on how long you guys want me to be on the stage.
So I can get you another beer, but I want to sort of ask you some questions, maybe some leading questions, and put you on the spot a little bit.
Please do.
Yeah, all right, great. Get you another beer. What are you having?
Lone Star, Texas style, baby.
Or water.
That's right. That's how I keep myself going.
Actually, there's a lot of beers back there. People want to come get some more beer because I know people lined up to get pizza earlier before the beer arrived. Oh, it's a twist top. Man, not oh. I'm trying to see it.
Everyone
It's a twist top. No, it's not.
It's kind of a interesting problem. I'm struggling mic and a beer.
Yeah, you don't want to drink the mic.
It's easier.
All right.
Over time.
I don't want to scare you too much. I just have a couple of questions though.
Please do.
And so, one of the things, I'll pose to you a question that I received in one of the first consulting gigs that I walked into in the finance space. And I was sat down in a room. I was seated in a room at a table surrounded by some Java architects and senior Java people who had turned into Python programmers. And they gave me a question which was, for me, a fairly WTF question, but I wanted to sort of see how you would answer it. So we all sat down and we had some nice early phone calls, which is why we had a physical meeting in New York. And everyone said their hellos and did their introductions. And so finally the more senior, kind of grumpier Java architect guy looks at me and says, so for Python, what kind of server would you use? What server would you use? Yeah, you can't do that. That was literally the question.
Is cloud an option? Because they love that.
No, this is before cloud.
It's before cloud.
This is before the great financial crash.
Oh.
This is late
Oh,
Bush administration.
Way
so.
back then, huh? I mean, that, yeah. Like in terms of like the physical hardware.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You have as much context as I had.
Yeah. I would use your local, like your laptop.
No, no, no. Software Python.
Oh.
What Python server?
Python server use. Oh, all right. Nginx. I mean, like in terms of web framework, Flask at this point. Django.
These are
Django
Java
2006.
architects, man. He's thinking Resin, Tomcat. He's
Oh, Tom. Yeah.
yeah.
That's tough, man. And especially in like 2006. Now I think we have a lot of options. But 2006 we might not have had enough of a sort of web community. I think Django was around.
Django Pyramid right there,
Yeah,
sort of.
Pyramid was there,
Yeah.
right. Was Nginx around?
Yeah, I think so,
Yeah.
but that wasn't. Well, actually, I tried to answer with that.
Yeah. How did you answer it? That's probably better.
Well, I was like, what do you mean? Because and the reason I bring this up is because we've talked sort of about, whether or not Python folks are cheaper than Java folks, whether or not people are organizationally and politically committed to a Java-based solution, all these other things. But actually, what I realized kind of in the course of the 5 minutes after that question was posed, like a turd on the table, was that they were thinking about this in a completely different way. They had a total SOA approach. And so they're like, oh, we've got, you can tell me about POJOs, we can talk about servlets and containers, and all this is how we think about how we build stuff. There's a middleware server, and it's like your religion, you're Catholic or you're Protestant, and then you build stuff on top of that, so your standard J2E kind of stuff. And the Python world, it's like, what server to use? I mean, well, if I need simple HTTP server, I'll use that. If I need Twisted, I'll use that. If I don't, and I started answering that way, and it made them all really uncomfortable, because it's actually the idea that we have choice in that matter that was extremely uncomfortable for them. They thought we were supposed to be hotshot architects and senior consultants coming in to lay down the answer of the perfect Python middleware in front of them.
Right.
And it was just, anyway.
No, that's a really good question.
It was like I literally had no answer. I was like, I don't know what do you mean, like a web server, or do you want
Yeah, like
Apache? Like, what are you talking about? Not my greatest consultant moment ever. But.
No, I mean, totally makes sense. Like I think that's so. I've had the similar question, and I kind of like folded it. I was like, we'll go with Tomcat, because it's okay. Because like from a web server sort of technology choice, like I think Java is a lot more mature. And if a certain organization thinks that here's how I'm gonna do my middleware, it doesn't quite impact the result that much, and you can still be pretty fast in terms of agility. It's the numerical Python, or like the scientific computing problem set, where agility becomes a big deal, where you cannot ship things fast enough. With web servers, you are pretty much at the point, like now there's Node.js and all those things, and a full stack sort of thing, sort of JavaScript, which is also, I think, a pretty good option from that perspective.
Yeah. So we talked about all the reasons why you would advocate for Python. What are some reasons why you would walk into an organization as a consultant and say, no, actually, Python's not the right answer for you here? Are there any situations like that?
So I think, that's pretty hard. Like, there's no generic situation where you say you cannot like use this whole programming language.
No.
But I think for web deployment or like sort of backend server stuff, like I would like sort of concede at that point, because Python has Django, then a Flask and a Pyramid, but none of them are as battle tested as some of the Java alternatives are. So that's the like one place where I'm like, okay, it kind of makes sense. Like if you are doing like any type of like array computing in Java, I would probably say, hey, you might want to look into like something else.
So when you say battle tested, do you mean like Instagram's running Python, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty battle tested. Is it battle tested from the perspective of like it's performant, it's low latency, can be tuned well, or is it actually the tooling and the knowledge around how to actually deploy, debug, monitor, maintain, all that stuff?
Yep. So in web, like the main sort of build thing is like pip, right? And pip breaks in a lot of your deployment circumstances, because you're basically shipping, you're trying to like rebuild things on that exact server. This is before like Docker and all those things, right? And so that's one of the places where I would say, okay, you might have a better build tooling that makes a lot more sense. With Conda, like it is the build tool for at least scientific Python, although it can do that a lot more. Like I am a lot more comfortable that, hey, look, this is a very mature sort of build tool. You can actually ship really good code. You can also do it with pip as well, but it really depends on if you have that type of talent that can figure things out quickly, and also when things break, like they have some kind of a passion around fixing it. And if you don't have that, I would say as an executive, you should not make that choice for them. You should let your team be autonomous around exactly what they want to do, and as long as it's not gonna just like create a big problem in terms of like organizational like sort of talent structure, like you are basically okay. Right? That's sort of my answer.
All right, good answer. And one last one last question. If you could have Guido and the core dev team make just 1 or 2 changes to the language, are there any on your plate, like on the wish list of things that would actually, and specifically not just make your personal use better, but actually improve Python's adoption in the kind of enterprise environments that you go into?
Port over NumPy to Jython. No, honestly, I mean,
Yeah.
that would be pretty cool. There's also like I think pip is like one of those things that I'm like always conflicted about, right? Like I'm not sure if I should be using conda or pip in a lot of these types of circumstances. And the fact that Guido said that, hey, I am not gonna make any stance on build tooling, which I think he has a really good reason for it. It does pose that question around, how do you ship code well in a sort of ubiquitous way. And I know Kana is trying to answer it, but there's like this point's like a lot of opinions around that that like it's pretty hard to converge quickly. So like that would be like one thing if I had met Guido in the 80s, I would say, hey man, you gotta have a
Packaging is the
official stance on that, right?
Yeah. Well, so the reason why Python packaging sucks, right, is because Guido doesn't use packages.
What
Like
does he do?
he admitted no. He literally said at PyCon about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
He was like, yeah, I was just never really that interested in packages, so I had someone else worry about it. And
he
for
writes
me, I write modules, and then if I need to make changes, I change the language. So he didn't. So everything he needed was the standard library by fiat, and then it was sort of like I didn't packaging problem. What packaging problem?
Right.
Just was not that interesting to him as a problem. And so now we get to live that. Yes.
Can you talk for a second about what it was like making a transition from being an employee to being a consultant and some of the surprises or interesting things about that?
Yeah, so I think one big change was like lifestyle. In a corporate life, I had a pretty amazing lifestyle, right? Like I probably worked about 3.5 hours a day at most. And I was
This is being live streamed, I think, at this point. By the way. Clawback.
This is only for this room, but stays in Austin, right?
Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah.
So I think like that part was like where I was, I had to make that conscious sort of choice that, hey, I'm gonna work in a space where it's gonna be a lot more faster in terms of pace, but also means many hours. And I'm also on the road like almost every week. The other part of it is that you have to understand empathy is a lot more of a thing as a consultant. As an employee, you could probably disagree and you may have your way, and that's okay. And you, even if you didn't, that's fine. But as a consultant, you kind of have to understand what their need is, and they may not be able to say it to you exactly. And you would have to figure out a clever way around it. So it's kind of like a problem-solving problem at the end of the day. But it is a lot more of understanding where people are from their political stature, from their sort of professional career, and also the type of things that they want to deliver to their board. And that's sort of how I think it was fairly new for me to understand that. Besides that, I think it's about the same thing. I enjoy the diversity and problems that I have now. Then one thing that I probably did over a year, and now I do 8 things, and that's more satisfying for me.
How much of your time do you spend looking for the next gig versus doing the current?
Yeah, so I've been super lucky. I'm part of a boutique consulting firm, so I'm not an independent consultant. So like we have had leads and we have a very good pipeline, and everything has been sort of, you know, like I've been like able to keep myself busy.
Right. Any other questions for Hussain?
So I was curious about one thing, since you've worked in the financial industry. Have you ever been able to use Python in high frequency trading context where the response has to be in 30 milliseconds and you cannot?
Right. So I think Peter will be able to answer that a lot better than I do, because I have not worked in that space. I am mostly in consumer lending, so we have like about, you know, 3 seconds to make a decision. You know? So it's like it doesn't really matter. But I think like in terms of like high performance Python, I'll let Peter make a plug into that.
Yeah, I think generally when I last had experience in that space, the folks that were using Python in an HFT context, they were using it in sort of 2 ways. One was to sort of, well, it was all sort of in the research area, right? It was to prototype things, and then it was to then do a lot of the higher end modeling and analytics. And usually it was sitting alongside MATLAB and Mathematica as well, just because of, again, the time frame when I was working in that space. And I've not had any intersection with new HFT. Like the space of HFT has evolved quite a bit in like whatever the 8 years it's been since I worked in it. So that's, I mean, even at that time, they were making ASICs. I mean, you have to go faster than bare metal for some of it, and the market itself has changed a little bit. So, yeah, I just didn't. Even at that time, I never even attempted to make the argument that kind of hard, low latency thing was a good fit for vanilla Python, just because that's. I mean, people were recoding or compiling down to C, C++. One thing that is interesting though is since we introduced Numba. And since the GPU extensions things have come out really, and Python has gone full bore on GPU because NVIDIA is really committed to that, what we're seeing is actually that the arguments about Python being slow, I don't hear those as maybe it's because me and people don't say that to me, but in general, I don't see that floated around as much either in the comment threads on Reddit or whatever. People generally are like, okay, people are using this on like, you know, 100 NVIDIA boards plugged into a rack of boxes. They probably know what they're doing, and it's probably not that slow. So I feel like the overall performance, raw performance, the zeitgeist understanding of Python has certainly had a phase change since when I was working back. I remember actually it was a different consulting gig, and it was HFT, and I had coded one particular routine. I figured out they'd written this Java code, and I recoded it into an array way. And it was more lines of code than the Java code, because the Java code was just explicit for loop, iterating over a couple of different things, and it was small, and it did it. And with the hotspot JIT, it actually ran pretty fast. I recoded this thing into some pretty awkward Python, goes with missing values, and like NumPy and record arrays are always a little, you know, they're not quite what you want a lot of times. And so I got laughed at by people for that, because it was more Python. But I never got to sit down and really benchmark with them, like, okay, let's scale this thing up, and let's see who's laughing, right? But anyway, nowadays we have Numba, we have other things that can go much faster than that, so. Now I'm ranting, so. Yeah.
Were you working out of an HFT here in Austin or in New York?
Neither.
Oh.
Yeah.
Can you say what city or?
Beverly Hills. All right. That's probably good enough to locate the, yeah. Yes?
Are you familiar with the Night Capital store? Your thoughts on it?
Do you want to comment about software or about capitalism?
Capitalism.
It's not employment, especially.
Yeah, I don't know. We're going drinking after this, right? Why don't we talk about that there? That's probably.
I thought we were already drinking.
Oh no, like real drinking. No,
Getting warmed up.
just getting warmed up. Yeah.
Like it.
I still owe you a couple of 2-3 fingers of scotch. What,
I am. I can drink.
okay, all right.
That's also because of
Yeah.
consulting. So.
Well, it is interesting actually. So one comment I'll make about the night situation is that all of the controls, there's so much regulation, and so many controls that are in place in the financial sector. And I think where the firms that, how to put it, the people that are really killing it, they're not really encumbered by those things, and they're mostly, they do some work to circumvent the kinds of like regulatory controls and things like that, but they end up blowing themselves up. They play fast and loose, some win hard, some die hard. I mean, it's just kind of how it goes. Yeah, it's a high volatility space.
Could I ask you a question?
Sorry, I sort of just, yeah. I'm tired, I'm sorry, I don't have my normal level of awareness, so.
What are your thoughts on Julia, and are you scared of it?
Julia, how many people here have played with Julia? Are interested? Julia curious? Really? Not that many. So when we started PyData in 2012, there was a lot more interest at that time in Julia. And I mean, Julia is the J in Jupyter, right? The JU in Jupyter. So I think that it's a very interesting project. I think if tools like Numba had not come around, if vectorized massive SIMD compute was not imminently the future of computation, then the kinds of technologies and innovation work they're doing at Julia would be they are working on the hard software problems, the compiler problems. How do you have an expressive language that's good for mathematics and analysis that can run very fast? Once you start scaling that across a few thousand cores on a GPU, some of that gets lost in the noise. It's about how fast can you do the SIMD. And you start rebasing algorithms into a way that's vectorizable. At that point, you're just using high-level scripting languages to coordinate and orchestrate the work. So I think that, you know, in the same sense of, how many people here know Amdahl's law, or familiar with the concept of Amdahl's law? So it's just a principle of optimization that, you know, you really can't go, you look at, you know, some process that takes some amount of time, and you want to optimize it. And the best, well, I'm going to butcher this completely. Again, I've not gotten very much sleep, but you have to really tackle the biggest parts of that, and even if you do at that point, you can speed the whole thing up no faster than basically taking that chunk out, right? And the problem is that if we think about what was the fundamental point of Julia, was to offer a really great new language that was amenable to just-in-time dynamic compilation without paying the lookup overhead and the cache misses and all the other stuff that a traditional imperative language would have. So it would be very good for math. And the innovation work they did there, that was the hard part of the problem circa mid-2000s. Now the problem itself has expanded, and the hard parts of the problem actually are easier to solve with vectorization. I don't feel like I explained that very well, but I'm sort of
interesting.
So I think it's interesting. I think that you know, I know the guys who make Julia, right? And I know that the CEO of Julia Computing Inc. and the founders and everything. They're great guys. I think there's going to be certain, what I've recommended them is, there's certain niche areas where Julia can probably do very, very well. You can take some dollars from SAS, you can take some dollars from KDB, you can take some dollars here and there,
Right.
but the broad base of it, Python is actually pretty much good enough. And with things like Jupyter, the cross-calling between Python, R, Julia, heck, even SAS and MATLAB is very, very powerful. So now you can sort of go between all these different things, and then it becomes very hard. If Python has this much momentum and this much adoption, it's hard for someone to go and take on a new language for this much incremental benefit. So
Very cool.
that was a lot of opinionated stuff. So I'm happy to take heckling,
What do you think
cheers.
I've been doing the whole time?
Any comments on that, or any? Nothing? Literally nothing. Yeah.
Is there time for me to give a quick announcement before the end?
Yes, actually, so what we can do is, if there's no other questions or anything, let's thank Hussain.
Thank you.
And why don't we quickly just finish off, like kill the beer, please, and then Jason, you can get set up, and then you can make an announcement. Sound good?
Wait, Jason's set, I'm making the announcement, and he got set up, or?
No, while people are getting beer, he'll set up, because he had a lightning talk he wanted to give, and then you sort of give your bit after that. Yeah, thanks. yeah, so I think what we need to do is. It's got, oh, you know what? It's, you know what? Do not touch anything. It is a, I think it's an AirPlay-based system. Do you have a Mac?
I do, luckily.
And before I screw
I can
this
help
up.
him with this.
Oh.
I run a user group here.
Okay,
So
great.
you get on a special cable factory network. You get on. I'll give you the password. It's not the normal password. So go to the cable factory. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so it's probably still connecting to the network. It's the, yeah. So yeah, you're probably fine.
What do you mean?
The password, oh, they changed it.
Okay, it'll probably fail. Just give it a second.
It was keep on the hacking, but now.
That was here about a year ago.
But they did change it, or they changed it too.
So which one do I connect to?
So the power of using things like Nginx, and we use that in our server software, is because there's a lot of plugins for proxying, support reverse proxying, socket proxying, authentication, all these different there is those situations like the middleware has a value in having a sensor there, like we're just munging the packets, so to speak. But if you're trying to build applications, basically, there's some load balancing and HA kind of plugins you can get for that. But the thing is that level of orchestration, people are going to containers. When people are using containers, they're going to microservices instead of microservices is a new concept. At that point, it's your middleware Java server thing becomes less relevant, and then it becomes more of like, are you using Compose, are you using Kubernetes, or using CoreOS, or whatever. And so now I think that question is
Okay,
but I
so
think, of
connect
course,
it
in
to the
enterprise
way
environments where they're still very heavily classical.
So go to the.
They do, it's a sort of, what they were looking for me was recommendation for what is the Python equivalent for Boss Enterprise Middle. Unicorn? Yeah, it's an example of that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, it's not like there's nothing in Python to do this sort of thing. It's more like that question is like the wrong question. Right? Is the TV on? Okay. Or you can press it. You try that one? Okay. Oh, it, yeah, lit up. The little chevron lit up. Yeah, Python's kind of put together a little differently.
What was it again?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's kind of funny you got the same question. I'm gonna go find my cue back there.
Cancel and then start manually.
Well, there are now online services where you don't
0102. There you go.
Yeah.
Nice. It's easy when it works.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
People usually stand like here in front of the TV or move off to the side maybe.
You can see around you. Yeah, it's pretty good. We also have a screen over there and over there.
That's good.
And you can look at that screen to see what we see.
Okay, that's cool.
There's one for internet.
There was a fax line, there were two voice lines, there were 3
What were you doing?
running a consulting and my wife was we shared facts. We had a couple of voice lines just so as far as the data lines, those were just there.
Started using it recently, like, I was still living with my parents, you know, as a kid. And it was always a balance of resources. Like, you would log on to the internet using your modem, and someone would need to use the phone. And I thought that it would be really cool if we just had 2 landlines. Luckily, broadband, like, high-speed internet year-round, landlines aren't even like a thing anymore.
Yeah, well, in those days, this was before outside of the outside of that. AOL was
Which was like really access to
there was no implant. You could send messages to
yeah, it was there like walled garden server service.
You ready?
Yep.
All right. I think we have to type and hold this in one hand. Is that okay? Or...
Okay, yeah, I can just
Oh, you have slides, right? So you
click. Yeah, I just have like a few slides.
All right. Okay, let's get started again. Just a couple lightning talks, and then if anyone else has any announcements they want to make, how are we doing? Okay, yeah. If anyone else has any other announcements they want to make or whatever, just kind of come up here to the side and talk to me. All right, Jason, here we go. Flask and data APIs.
Yeah. Hey guys. Hear me? Cool. Hey guys. Gonna do a quick talk today about Flask and data APIs. Before I start, just want to get an idea of experience. So how many people have used Django before for web? Okay. How about Flask? A little less, about the same. Cool. How many people have used it for doing data API stuff? Okay. So just a little bit about myself. That's just my contact information. I've been doing Python for about 4 years. And I've been doing engineering for about 10, 11 years. And I've been freelancing recently doing, working a lot with data. So the problem I run into a lot is I'll have a client or something that has a data store, whether that's a SQL database or some remote endpoint or Postgres or whatever, but they have a front-end team that they want to be able to access this data easily. Front-end team doesn't want to, they just want an API to hit, right? Like they're not Python programmers, they're doing JavaScript things, D3, whatever. So I've had clients that said they just want a quick and easy API. So one way to do that is with Django. Django has a lot of built-in awesome functionality for doing web apps and things like that. But a lot of times I just want something quick and simple to serve up an API and get it off the ground. And Flask is really good for that. Okay, I have a little. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Flask is a micro framework. It doesn't come with all the bells and whistles like Django. Super lightweight, code is clean and minimal, which I really like. And they use decorators, these things called decorators, to add functionality to different functions. If you don't know what decorators are, I can talk a little bit about that in a minute, but I probably won't explain it very well. It's super easy to deploy. There's great support for it with all of the platform as a service things like Elastic Beanstalk and Heroku. I made this simple API for one of my clients and got it up in Heroku in like an hour. So, and Heroku, has, it's free to start, So I use it for demo purposes often to show the client, okay, here's what I've served up for you. So this is just a basic, this is an endpoint that I created in Flask. And like I said, Flask uses these decorators basically to do all the routing for your endpoints. So you can see basically the username thing over there with the little, less than, greater than, carets in there. That's your variable. So basically when you type that into your web address, that's what can change. And then you can pass that into your function with depget sifs username, and then you can manipulate that and do whatever you want with it. So I cut out some of the code in here for the client, but basically I'm manipulating it and I'm returning JSON, right? So Flask has this built-in thing called JSONify, which just makes sure it's valid JSON. It's going to return to an endpoint that everyone knows how to work with JSON, right? So makes the front-end devs really happy. And then this is just a sample endpoint using post. And again, pretty similar. You use decorators and you just define what methods you want in your endpoint. And the only difference is here, you can manipulate this request object, and it has a built-in method called getJSON, which will return a dictionary basically when you pass it that JSON with your post request. So that's also really nice. The other thing I want to point out here is that requires auth decorator. Again, that's something they wanted some authentication on the front end, so I just made a super basic HTTP auth on the front end. Put SSL behind it or in front of it.
I'm sorry.
What's that?
Where's the request object coming from?
Yeah, so that's one of those magic built-in things with Flask that you get with the framework. So if you look at the docs, basically when you do a post, that the body that you send with the post is that request object. And so there's a whole bunch of other built-in things that come with that. The getJSON is just one of them that I use a lot because it's just easier to work in JSON if you can with everything. I won't go too much into how this decorator works, but the basic idea is decorators are Python syntax. They call it, it's, what do they call it? Syntax sugar, something that basically adds functionality to your existing functions, right? So all this is doing is, when they call an endpoint, it's doing a basic check on username and password. And if it fails, then it'll return fail. That's all I have. Yeah, lightning talk, so really quick. I have something deployed I can show. It's not really exciting, but basically this is an app I deployed for one of my clients just to Heroku, and all it does is it's an email parser. So they wanted, like, how in Gmail, if you have a travel email or something like that, it'll say, this is when your flight is, your time, location. So they basically wanted that, but inside their web app. So I did that for them and used this third-party service called Sift, and then provided it as an API for them.
Would you zoom in for a hot second?
Yeah, well, that's really small. Yeah, so I'm not a front-end developer, so it's kind of basic on the front end, but kind of more of a back-end Python guy, data guy. So I let the JavaScript guys do that. But yeah, so basically, this is just one of the get endpoints, and basically it was just using that chunk of code basically to return JSON, and you can paginate it and stuff like that, and then that's it. That's all I got.
I could tell you're not a front-end developer because there wasn't a cookies warning popping up and sponsored content across the top.
Not bad.
All right. You have an announcement, right?
Oh, yeah, just
Okay.
a quick announcement.
Mhm.
So, I'm a Linux sysadmin. I gave a talk a while back here about full stack release management. Recently, I found myself out of work, So I was wondering if anyone has like a startup or a personal project that they could just use some help with. I just want sort of something to do that's not playing video games. Just like I can help you program in Python. I can set up continuous integration for you, free, no strings attached. Just maybe we can like meet at lunch and program together, so I can sort of stay fresh and stuff. So just let me know if anyone's interested, and I can help you out. Maybe we can chat about it at Gingerman or something. Thanks.
Thank you. We have another lightning talk, I believe.
I think I might need to borrow a laptop.
You have to borrow a laptop?
Yeah. Because this is the new MacBook. I don't have a.
I have one. Oh, I have a new MacBook. It just uses AirPlay.
Yeah, this is just
Oh,
AirPlay.
it's AirPlay. Okay,
Just
great.
put in your option.
Okay. I might need some help.
Oh, yeah, so what now? Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Because that'll buy me some time.
On Capital Factory.
Where do people want to go afterwards? I heard sort of a default Gingerman vote in. Well, we're sort of a little bit further north than we typically are. So, you know, if people want to go to CU29 or people want to go Firehouse or whatever. Nothing. You guys are a quiet bunch tonight. What's going on? Is it the lighting? Is this subdued lighting?
It's the summer heat.
It's the summer heat. I was freezing in the office today. Yes?
Spinning wheel of death.
Everyone's freezing? Yes to Firehouse? Yes to freezing. Oh, okay, yeah.
I think you need the code for the
Yeah. I think you have too many tabs open.
yeah, that's purposeful.
I've not yet seen a T-shirt that's got like all the little totally minified, like tiny tabs.
Yeah.
There you go.
There we go.
Okay, great.
Cool. Oh my God, that's a lot of tabs, dude.
Oh, yeah.
That's the Chrome theme.
No. This is Yeah, okay. Great. So this is just going to take like another minute, so I figured I'd just talk about what's happening under the hood. Oh, wait. Okay. Yeah, just.
What?
I want to ask the last speaker a question.
Sure.
Are you ready? Yeah, I can talk and type. What's up? Sorry, last speaker. Oh.
Yeah.
I want to ask if you did any benchmarking, at what point you would scale to multiple web apps? Did you use Unicorn or Logos or?
Oh, yeah. So actually, yeah, for this one I wasn't really concerned about speed or scale, but actually to deploy it to Heroku, I think I used Gunnicorn, or however you pronounce it, because that was a server that they supported. Yeah, the other thing about Flask is out of the box, like if you run it in the development mode, it's really bad. Apparently it's single threaded and whatever. So yeah, you want to make sure that you're using Gunnicorn or something like that.
I think it's Green Unicorn.
Yeah, I don't know. G Unicorn, there you go.
Okay. All right. Great. Okay. So my name is Ben Zeitlin. I work at Continuum, but I live in Michigan. And I participated in SciPy giving a tutorial, and I built, in addition to delivering the tutorial, I actually built a lot of the infrastructure along with some other people to run the tutorial. So our task was to teach people about parallel programming in Python. And another tutorial that also ran on the same infrastructure was also teaching people about a specific framework in Python. Sorry, this is okay. There we go. I can talk down to you. A specific framework in Python called Dask that's also useful for parallel programming both on your laptop and on a distributed cluster. So I just wanted to show a little bit about how I built that infrastructure and maybe, I don't know, influence you people to build things similarly. So when I think about distributed computing on the infrastructure side, the IT people or ops people tend to think about these sort of things of like, what does it look like to deploy? Do I have to handle multi-tenancy? How do I manage all the resources for a single person? So multi-tenancy is all of you people all
coming onto the cluster at the same time and being able to support all those jobs. Resource management is making sure that any one of you don't occupy too many of the resources at any given time. So all of us kind of share things equitably. And then making sure that my environment kind of maps across the entire cluster. So Python, unlike Java, has this inherent problem. So if you call from Java, you can kind of build this entire binary all in one. You can ship it around. If anybody's done any kind of C, MPI programming, you can make, again, this giant binary, ship that binary around. Python has this problem where how do you move all of the dependencies with you, especially if there's compiled dependencies. So there's a couple solutions for that. One is this, you could have preloaded environments everywhere. So if you have an NFS mount, do people know what NFS is? Okay, some of you do. So NFS is basically, I have this space that gets mounted onto every machine in the cluster. So I'm guaranteed that there's, whatever I do locally will happen everywhere on the cluster. I can ship the environment, which is a little nuanced, but possible now with mini-conda. I can ship a spec of the environment, so I can ship like a requirements file or a conda end file and say, go meet this spec. And that's usually part of the framework's job to go read whatever that is and go install those things. Or I can use something called Docker. Are people familiar with Docker here? Can I get a quick show of hands? How about Kubernetes? Do people know what Kubernetes is? Okay, so most people are familiar with Docker. Kubernetes is this resource management tool that's useful for putting containers onto lots of machines into this cluster. So I want this container to have this much memory, and this much disk space, and this many CPUs, and go provision that for me somewhere. And if I build lots of containers together, I can satisfy lots of those demands all at once. And Kubernetes is a very popular tool for doing that. So this tutorial was run on Kubernetes and GCE. I'm just going to take a quick check over here. Sorry, I just spun up.
What is GCE?
Oh, GCE is Google Compute Engine. So Google gave us a bunch of money to run these tutorials.
Container engine.
Google, yeah, I think Compute Engine. It's the general one. And then there's also the Container Engine as well. I think, to be a jerk, because I think it's Container Engine, yeah, or something like that. So I built this very satisfying blue button, but it's not working because just before I arrived 2 minutes ago, Peter asked me to do a lightning talk. So what you see here is actually the cluster has 8 terabytes of RAM and 1,300 CPUs. So I spun that up 2 minutes before I came up here. So it's pretty fast response time to go provision those resources. And they're not too terribly expensive. Oopsie, that's proprietary work. So I know, I'm trying to get over there. And right now I'm just waiting. I'm trying to pre-populate all the nodes with an image. So I'm going to oh, great, okay. Perfect. So I'm going to delete all these. This is going to delete everything. And now all of you should try this. Hopefully this doesn't fall on my face. So we're going to delete all these. This could just totally suck. But so if I hit that blue button, this should be less than 10. Oh, great. Oh, thank God. Okay. I sacrificed my firstborn child to, the demo. So you should all try this. If you have mobile devices, this will work as well. If you bring out your phones, so if you go to PyCon-parallel, it's HTTPS, and I didn't write the Nginx thing to make it nice. So HTTPS pycon-parallel.jovian, JOVYAN.org. It's a very weird URL. You should thank Min for that, because whatever. And then you hit this very, very satisfying blue button. Again, you should get another notebook. This is the Jupyter notebook. Everybody's familiar with the Jupyter notebook? Okay, great. And the password is pydata, and you're automatically now running a notebook. Great, okay, but there's even more coolness here. So it's not just the notebook. There's also Jupyter Lab is running right there as well. So who's familiar with Jupyter Lab? This is the new hotness, or maybe, I don't know, it depends on the kind of emotional state that you are in right now. This is whether or not you like IDEs or whether or not you like IDEs in the cloud. But this is generally where Jupyter is moving to. So it sort of has this IDE framework, something like Spider or PyCharm or whatever it is that you like. It has a file viewer, and it also has the IPython kernel. It's generally the notebook plus, something like that. And hold on, I'm gonna go. I deleted it. Sorry, this is just a little challenging. What actually is happening, I'm not sure what to show you first because I'm just so excited that this worked. Okay, so what's actually happening under the hood is you hit this very satisfying blue button. It talked to this thing that's running inside of Kubernetes, and then you got this notebook that's over here. It's actually hitting a proxy that's connected to this very large cluster. So if everybody did this right now, you'd get a 9-node cluster, each with 8 gig. Each node has 8 gigabytes of RAM. One node is the notebook and Jupyter Lab, and the other 8 are all the workers in this framework. So if you're familiar with Spark, as I said before, Dask, you would be automatically connected to those compute engines. You could do significant compute. So when you go and teach this tutorial, it's not just like, here's things working on your laptop. You can actually do serious work and ask generally interesting questions. So if we want to just quickly look at something. So again, this is a little hard. Here's a, things get a little weird when you leave. Okay. Notebooks, and let's look at these distributed data frames. Great, okay. So this pulls a bunch of NYC taxi data. We can read it into memory. This is around, I don't know, 30 gigabytes of data or something like that. But it's spread out throughout our cluster. We can connect a Dask scheduler to it, and we can look at persisting all this data. We can also look at, Dask has worked very hard at building some nice viz around it as well. And that also is exposed over here. So we can look at the workers. We can look at all the tasks that are done, which is none. Maybe this is already finished. Oh, that finished very quickly.
Use fewer nodes.
Use fewer nodes. Yeah, I have to restart this, but maybe that's good enough for a lightning talk. Okay, I think it's taken enough time. But really, I'm going to leave this up for like another minute. If you do want to play, you can go to it on your phone or wherever, and it will work. You'll have a 9-node cluster. The URL is pycon-parallel-jovian.org. So actually, the little bit of philosophy is when you go back to your institutions, or what you should expect when you try to build these things is give people blue buttons to let them do the rest of their work. Like, these things are entirely possible to do, not just by teams of people, but by a single person can go build blue buttons to make very powerful things accessible to domain experts. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ben. How much money per minute does 8 terabytes of RAM and that many machines not cost us?
Well, it's good. 8. It was 10. It was like $30 an hour.
That's not bad.
It could be a lot cheaper than that.
Really?
Yeah, it can be 8
$30 an
times.
hour is a lot for servers.
That's a lot of servers, though.
No, that's 10. That's 10 servers.
Oh, that's 10 servers. Okay.
Yeah, but it can go down to 80 cents per node per hour.
Okay.
So $8 per hour.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So we need to wrap up and vacate the premises here. But before we do that, do people have an idea of where we want to go? You have an idea? You're nodding.
I was still processing the saying.
So where do we want? Any suggestions where we want to go?
Let's go to the closest place.
Closest place?
Copper, what's it called?
Yeah, CU 29.
Can we go somewhere on the way back to Atlassian where I parked?
Because it is so close, it is technically on the way back.
Perfect.
It is literally across the street from the Omni, so. All right, great. So let's just go. Basically, if you go out to the hotel, it's on the other side of Brazos. They have a great smoked rosemary cocktails. Thanks, everyone. CU 29.
It's the copper bar.
Is that a battery?
It really was. I will leave this here. Alrighty.
Hey, I'm Cass.
Hi. Yes. Sorry you were out of time, but next time will be
Definitely. Next time.
All right. Good.
Yeah, so I had the one idea for the talk that I have. But I have a much more interesting thing about like crowdsourcing a project for earthquake locations and things.
Cool.
And I think it can be done, and I just want to throw it out there. But I need a chalkboard for it. It's
You need
gonna
a
be-
chalkboard
I need
for it.
a dry erase. You know.
We could.
I have a month now. I can make slides.
You make
I
some
can
slides. You have a month.
Yeah, it's
You
like,
have a
wait,
month.
I thought I would need slides. Yeah.
Yeah, just a few simple slides would be great.
How do I contact? Thanks for bringing it together. I haven't had together for a while.
Oh, really? Okay, great. Yeah, because I try to have a
Like half the time the
It's not open.
So I would say that the best way to do it, honestly, is, well, what I found is like,
Well, then let me take this into. Really? Put it on a shirt?
I'm so sorry, you're not allowed to come here with your 50 friends.
That's true.